Hello everybody and welcome back to another Earthward Devlog. Today we're going to talk about world generation and how I was able to get a Magicite style room generation system up and running. If you guys are interested in learning more about Earthward, you can go ahead and join the Discord with a link in the description. And if you want to help us fund the animated trailer for Earthward's Kickstarter, you can help us out over on Patreon or on Discord, whichever one works best for you. So one of the biggest problems in procedural generation is making it actually feel fun. There are a lot of instances where games try and do this, but they end up just landing on either side of the spectrum of randomness and fun. One side of the spectrum is the game not being random enough. The procedural generation keeps giving you the same rooms, the same arrangement of items or solids or objects. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, it might actually be too unpredictable and too random to the point where the player can't really get a pattern or really master the system. Now, of course, not all games need to have this sort of thing where the player is always getting better. I want it to be random enough so that it doesn't feel like it's constantly repeating itself, but I also need to make sure that it's just not too unpredictable and that there's at least somewhat of a pattern in how this is all being done. So let's take a look at how I streamlined this process. The first thing I had to do was find a way to actually design and make my rooms. For a while I considered making my own room or level editor, but then I realized that that's a lot of work, so I threw that idea away. I'd used Tiled before and I wasn't really a huge fan of it, but in this case because I'm using GameMaker, they have their own room editor. The problem is that I can't really take everything in that room and then place them next to each other. So what I did was I made this little exporter that will take all of the objects and tiles within a GameMaker room and export it to a JSON file. And that way I can recreate all of the contents of a room from a JSON file. So you can kind of see where this is going. I can just create a room given a JSON data file at a certain position within my game world. And this ended up working really well because I could just place my rooms next to each other like 2D Legos or something like that. This did take me a little while to implement, but I think it was definitely worth it because I can just edit my rooms inside of GameMaker Studio, which saves a ton of time, and I don't need to have another application or another monitor and then import it into GameMaker. I can just design, launch my game, and then press the Save All Rooms button, and that will cycle through all of the rooms that I tagged as room prefabs, and then it'll just save those to a JSON file, and then I can just take that and use them as the rooms for the world generation. But there's more. If you really wanted to, you can go and make your own world generation rooms and use those instead, meaning you can mod your own world generation for the game. I am very excited to see what people end up doing with this. When it comes to the actual code and algorithm for placing these worlds and actually making the rooms, it's really not so bad. What I do is I have each of my rooms get tagged to be a type of room. So maybe this room will always appear in the world generation, or maybe it will sometimes appear with like a certain % chance, or maybe there's like a special room where it'll only ever appear once, or maybe it'll appear once very rarely or something like that. Within each of the rooms, there is also some randomization. Now, the actual structure of the tiles is going to be mostly the same for each of the different room prefabs, but the thing is, I can have an infinite number of these room prefabs that it chooses from. So I could literally just like spend a day cranking out like 50 different room prefabs or levels, which literally means infinite combinations in the actual game itself, because if I have just 50 rooms, the amount of possible room combinations you could have is 50 factorial. Not even the calculator can comprehend that number. But in other news, I've been working really hard on reworking all of the art and textures in Earthward so that it actually has a good color palette. If you didn't know, the one I was using before was literally the default color palette in Sprite. The funniest part was, I didn't even realize this was the case until about a year into development. It kind of worked, but I have my own palette now. The Faded Forest is now called the Stone Forest instead, because I think that just makes a little bit more sense. And it also means I can add a bunch of stone-themed enemies to this area, like having a rock spider, which hangs from the ceiling on its webs and then just tries to fall on top of you and crush you, and a bunch of other things as well that I'm not going to mention just yet. There are also some helpful tips in the bottom right of the screen now, like telling you how to interact with things and how to craft, because in all of my playtests, nobody could figure out how to craft an item until I told them to. And so at least this way, the very, very basics of the game are explained to you in a way that doesn't really obstruct the gameplay very much and just kind of helps you if you need it. And of course, if you want to disable this, you can just go into the options and toggle it on or off. This is also a really crucial thing to have for anyone who's using a controller to play the game. Having mappable input and telling you what buttons you need to press to do a certain action is generally just a good idea in games. And speaking of controllers, I also recently added the ability to do LAN multiplayer, which basically just means everybody is on one screen of Earthward and you all have a shared inventory and shared health. And so what ends up happening is just absolute chaos. Unfortunately, I won't be able to implement real multiplayer right now because the overhead is just a little bit too much for a GameMaker project. But if you do decide to get a bunch of controllers and play multiplayer with some of your friends, you'll get special character unlockables and also Steam achievements too. So if you want to 100% the game, you actually have to go and make some friends. I think I'm going to end the video here, but make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and if you want to be a part of any of the cool competitions, or just get to see some exclusive clips of Earthward, join us in Discord with a link in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next devlog.